Oasis Audio presents The Happiest Life by Hugh Hewitt. Read for you by John McClain. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The Epistle to the Philippians. Introduction. Gifts and Givers. The secret to happiness is freedom, and the secret to freedom is courage. Thucydides. Courage undergirds every good thing. Courage is, as has long been said, the first virtue because it allows all other virtues to flourish. It takes courage to look clearly forward and backward, and to make a change in direction that increases happiness and human flourishing. This is a book about the courage to give and receive the best gifts that this wonderful life can offer to both giver and receiver. It takes a little courage even to talk about this gift-giving with your spouse and family, and a lot of courage to change your ways when it comes to being a taker in order to become a giver. Perhaps this book will help. I'm writing it to prod my children to remember that these are the things that motivated their parents and which we hope will continue to motivate them. If other parents give other children the book to help them reach the same conclusions, it will have succeeded beyond my greatest hopes. Almost every parent I have known agrees with the statement that a mother or a father is only as happy as their least happy child. Most agree that they are happiest when their children are giving and receiving gifts among themselves. Genuine gifts of whatever value, or of no monetary value at all. Giving and receiving among children is a wondrous thing for a parent to behold. The observations on happiness that follow are not unique or new. They've been bouncing around the world for centuries. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, written more than 2,300 years ago, is concerned primarily with achieving happiness, the chief good as he put it. I have no claim of expertise on the conditions that produce human happiness, other than having been, for the most part, very happy throughout my life. I have, however, made a career for the past 24 years of interviewing people for radio and television. That allowed me to observe a lot of very different people at pretty close range, and to read a great number of very different books. I figured out that I have now interviewed far more than 10,000 people, perhaps even double that number. That doesn't include callers to my radio show. A lot of the people I interviewed had written books, which I read before the author appeared. Unlike most talk show hosts, I have managed to read the books of 9 out of 10 authors who have appeared on the show. The list of those interviews, authors and non-authors alike, is pretty remarkable and includes the very powerful, the very famous, the very rich, and the very good. For just one example, I interviewed His Holiness the Dalai Lama for 3 hours. So, to quote the estimable Bill Murray in Caddyshack, I've got that going for me. But whether it is President George W. Bush or Julie Andrews, Michael Dell or Justice Stephen Breyer, or any of the other thousands of interviewees, they all began life helpless and will all end it dead, and in between they will have hoped to be happy for at least some of the time. As my friend Dennis Prager says, happiness is a serious problem. He is right, of course. Happiness, real and genuine happiness, is the essence of a life well lived. Only recently in my broadcast career did I begin to wrestle with happiness on air, in early 2013. I did so with the assistance of Dr. Larry Arnn, the president of Hillsdale College, who has for many, many years been my teacher. I had begun to consider writing about happiness the previous summer when my friend, Dr. Jack Templeton, gave me his little book, Thrift and Generosity, The Joy of Giving, which I heartily recommend to you. Jack and his wonderful wife, Dr. Pina Templeton, have spent a lifetime helping others, and his compact book condenses all that experience, as well as the wisdom of his father, Sir John Templeton, into an easy-to-absorb primer on happiness. Aristotle, on the other hand, is not so easy to absorb, very difficult, in fact, which is why I turned to Larry Arnn for help. Over the years, Larry has often joined me on air for long talks about big subjects. Almost a decade ago, he allowed me to march him through a history of ideas that spans 2 broadcast days, 6 radio hours, that so charmed the audience that it is played the last broadcast day of every December and the first broadcast day of every January since it was first recorded. Larry Arnn, like most of the faculty at Hillsdale College, is a remarkable teacher. So, believing radio to be uniquely positioned to deliver content about big ideas in a coherent, useful way, I asked him if he and his colleagues would undertake a Great Books on the Radio series at the beginning of 2013, to which he agreed. The last hour of every Friday's broadcast is now given over to a conversation with Dr. Arnn or one of his distinguished colleagues, Dr. Paul Ray, Dr. Thomas West, or others, on one of the greatest works of the West, such as the Iliad, the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. This took many weeks. Herodotus, Thucydides, various works of Plato, and on through the canon. These conversations were instantly beloved by some, hated by others, and a source of controversy among a few radio professionals who wondered whether a general radio audience would, or could, actually listen to a broadcast hour on such topics. The debate is now over, as the audience became larger and larger and more enthusiastic. Here were conversations worth having and hearing. And the most important of those conversations? The 4 hours devoted to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, the book about achieving happiness. My life is now 58 years along, an age by which my 2 grandmothers had both waved goodbye to this world. 58 was barely the third quarter for my Gramps, A.T. Roll, who made it on his own wheels and in his own house to the age of 101. My other grandfather, for whom I was named and to whom I owe a few thousand chuckles from long-distance operators and call center handlers, made it to 91. Whether I have inherited my grandmother's brevity genes or A.T.'s and grandfather Hugh's long-distance DNA remains to be seen, but in either case, it is time to write down my observations on the secrets to being, for the most part, happy. Let me hasten to explain that, for the most part. As you might have guessed, it is a key qualifier, a very important one. Nobody gets out of here without pain or sorrow along the way. Nobody has the perfect package, said my pal Coach Jerry again and again, who, like all coaches, was a font of condensed wisdom, repeated often. This hard reality about the inevitability of hardship and grief is crucial to the happiness that the 7 gifts make possible. Which gifts? I'm coming to those. As I noted above, I began this book with my 3 children in mind, with the hope that it would contribute to their happiness and their children's. It is about the 7 genuine gifts that they can give and receive from each other and from others, especially their own spouses and children, and why I believe the act of giving those gifts produces happiness. They will laugh at the first thought of their dad as a gift giver, as I am a notoriously bad selector of presents, famously so within my family and among my friends. The fetching Mrs. Hewitt, as I call my wonderful wife when I'm on the radio, has been on the receiving end of at least 1,000 presents over the 30-plus years of our marriage, and I am being overly generous with myself when I say that more than 90% have been returned as swing-and-a-miss gifts. This is why Nordstrom is so crucial to my marriage. No harm, no foul is the rule at Nordstrom, with its famous no-questions-asked return policy, and over the years Betsy has shared a few chuckles with the sales associates at Nordstrom on the woeful taste of her husband in pretty much everything to do with women's gifts. My daughter has similar stories about my lack of present-giving acuity, which she believes must be intentional because my gift-giving is so often off the mark. My boys, of course, had some years of good loot when soldiers, action figures, play weapons, and gift cards appeared under the tree. I am a pretty good bet for the early years of any grandchild as well, since big, brightly colored blocks, Playmobil figures, Legos, and Tub People books are easy to come by. But generally, I stick to cash, and my colleagues who help me run the show and my law firm are the happier for my giving of checks and not cheesecakes. Thankfully, my lack of skill at selecting presents doesn't figure in this book. Presents are not the gifts I am writing about here. These gifts, of which I have tried to be a profligate giver, are far more consequential than shoes and purses, iPads and basketball tickets. These are the gifts that in turn produce happiness in their recipient, and therefore in the giver. They are 1. Encouragement, 2. energy. 3. Enthusiasm. 4. Empathy. 5. Good humor. 6. Graciousness. 7. Gratitude. Everyone is eligible to be a giver of these gifts. Everyone. You don't need wealth. You don't have to be 21. You don't even have to be literate. That said, some people are particularly well placed to give some of these gifts at particular times. I deal with this in Part 2, which covers the 7 different givers of these gifts: spouses, parents, family members, friends, coworkers, teachers, and members of a church congregation. Those roles are theoretically open to all readers at some point in their lives. The one job not open to anyone, that of God, does, however, present a relationship available to everyone, and is ultimately the source of all good gifts and the impulse to give them. And so I conclude the book with a reflection on God as the first giver of the greatest gifts. Throughout these chapters are the stories I have lived that allow me to illustrate each of these gifts. Each of these unique gifts can actually be bestowed on other people. They can be, in a word, transferred. Thus, they are gifts. Each of these unique gifts bestows a particular grace on the recipient and endows the giver with a particular grace as well. Each can be given repeatedly, and with the practice of giving, expertise will grow in that particular practice. Some people practice their golf games. Others practice their patience. The latter will be happier, by far. So it is with all the gifts. In addition to the 7 gifts and the 7 givers, there is also a singular characteristic, a behavior, that accompanies all the gifts when given in a particular way. One that, while not a potential gift that can be actually and specifically given, is a pattern of conduct that can be modeled. In modeling, it can be of enormous influence on everyone in your life. I begin by looking at this behavior, generosity, as it is the key to all the other gifts. It's a multiplier of every gift given by every giver. Underlying generosity is that virtue I began this chapter by noting: courage. You have to have the courage to give away what you hold dearest, again and again and again, every day. Remarkably, self-sacrifice and generosity produce the greatest, most enduring happiness. Some might find parts of this book uncomfortable, very uncomfortable in fact. But it is true as far as I know truth. And the first truth is that the most generous people I have known have been the happiest.